with timeouts, we're literally putting kids in isolation when they're struggling emotionally. We're telling them, hey, go calm yourself down. And when you can fix your behavior and you're ready to behave, then you can rejoin us. So we separate them from connection at the exact moment they need it the most. Welcome to the Connect Method Parenting Podcast, where correction is out, connection is in, and your kids want to listen to you. I'm Andy Martineau, creator of Connect Method Parenting, here to help you stay calm, confident, and connected no matter what. Hey, everybody. Have you ever heard the phrase, it's like smoking on an airplane? If not, hold that thought. We're going to circle back to it. And yes, I promise I will get to how all of that relates to parenting, because after all, this is the Connect Method Parenting Podcast. I have been thinking about creating this episode for you all for a while. It's kind of a funny, quirky episode that's going to talk about the parenting evolution over time. I've had a lot of requests to do this because there's so much misinformation out in the world about parenting, and there's a good reason why it's there. So let me start with a little story. When I was in 6th grade, my neighbor and friend Jody invited me to a sleepover, and I was so excited. It was my first non-cousin sleepover that I can remember having, and during that long, crazy night, two wild things happened. First, we watched Airplane the movie, which I'm pretty sure my parents would never have approved of at the time. And second, the neighbor across the street's house burned down. Everyone was okay. The house was eventually rebuilt and painted to a lovely shade of pink, which was totally acceptable in the 80s. It was a very eventful night. One of the scenes in that movie has stuck with me for years, probably because of the fire. I remember that night in detail. And it's this scene where people are smoking on the airplane. And I remember thinking that was a little bit weird, but I hadn't flown on an airplane, or maybe the sleepover was even younger than 6th grade, because at 6th grade I had. So anyway, maybe I'd flown, maybe I hadn't. I remember thinking it was weird, maybe because I had flown. I was thinking I hadn't, but I flew to Chicago in 5th and 6th grade with my neighbor's family. I was really good friends with their daughter, Dina. She and I were besties. We would make all sorts of concoctions together. We had such a good time. And I flew back east with them. It's my first time on an airplane. And I got to hang out with them for 3 weeks in Chicago, 2 or 3 weeks in Chicago. I was like a suburb of Chicago, and I got to see lightning bugs for the first time and grass that didn't require sprinklers. It was really eventful, but I digress. So I remember seeing this scene from Airplane, and people were smoking. And there was another bizarre scene where someone's playing the guitar and keeps unhooking a girl from an IV, which now that I'm older, I'm trying to figure out, where would that have happened on the airplane? I don't know. But at the time, it was just a funny scene. And when we were in New Zealand and we had this super long flight that I knew we were going to have to make to go from New Zealand back to the States, I think it was 15 or 18 hours. I can't remember. It was a really long flight with layovers. I remember having this memory come back about airplane travel in general. And then I was having a conversation. I was listening to something, and a couple of times it came up, this idea of smoking on an airplane. And I just started laughing because it's such a funny thing that we accepted. At the time, it was just the way it was. I didn't fly much growing up, but I remembered watching this movie, Airplane, and then other old movies. We watched a lot of older movies, like in the Frank Sinatra and that era growing up. My parents loved that era. I do too. And they would dress up to go on their flight. They'd carry their suitcases, because back then you didn't have wheels on suitcases. And there would be a smoking and non-smoking section. Now, this was even happening when I grew up in the 80s and 90s. People would dress up because that's what you kind of did in those days. Put on your nice polyester and go on a flight. And I remember one time picking my dad up with my mom and my siblings at the airport. We weren't even in a terminal. We were in Phoenix, so it's a fairly big city, but we were standing outside under shade. I do remember that. And I remember seeing the airplane and watching my dad go down the stairs onto what I thought was the runway. I think you call it the tarmac, walking over to us. He was dressed in a brown polyester suit, and he was holding a brown leather suitcase. Random memory, I know, but he was dressed to the nine, as everyone was getting off that plane. And so that was the norm. You'd have a suitcase without wheels. You'd go up in this metal tube that would travel hundreds of miles an hour, 30,000 feet off the ground. The windows wouldn't roll down. It ran on jet fuel, an engine where you ignite a spark, you set on fire the gas, which explodes and creates this internal energy that makes it stay in the sky. How's that for an explanation? Do you like it? So we're in this metal tube, 30,000 feet off the ground, going 100 miles or hundreds of miles an hour, no windows rolling down, and there's people smoking. They would put the cigarette in their mouth, they'd light up, and we weren't worried that this fire might set something else on fire and get to the fuel and explode everything. We weren't, that wasn't a thing. Nobody was talking about that at the time. And if you wanted to smoke, you would just sit in the smoking section. So when you bought your plane ticket, you were careful to differentiate whether you wanted to sit in the smoking section or the non-smoking section. That was like a big deal. And this was totally normal. When you bought your plane ticket, you would decide what section you were in, and then you would go up in this metal tube and you would fly wherever you're going. And there were people on the plane smoking. And then at some point, all of the people, all the humans, they started to change their way of thinking and thought, ooh, I don't know if this is a very safe idea. Yeah, that's insane. And it was the end of an era. So I did a little research on the history of smoking on an airplane because I don't remember when they phased it out. And I was shocked at how it wasn't that long ago. Smoking on airplanes was phased out over time. And so there were different dates, but I'm going to do it based on the US. So here's the breakdown of how it became illegal, particularly in the United States. In 1988, smoking was banned on domestic flights of 2 hours or less. 88, that's not very long ago. But it wasn't until 1990 that they banned smoking on domestic flights of 6 hours or less. And then it wasn't until 2000 that they did a complete ban on all domestic and international flights by US airlines. So what was once normal, and it was simply this kind of ticket versus that kind of ticket, became something that was not allowed. It became something that had very strict penalties. There were guidelines around it. There were consequences, fines, punishments, all of the sudden within 2 decades, less than 2 decades. So what is that? 12 years? 12 years. We went from smoking section, non-smoking section to completely banned. And now in most places, smoking is not allowed inside any buildings because they know of the health risks that even to secondary smoke. So they don't want to put people at risk. And I went down this rabbit hole with this. I started thinking, what are all of the things that at one point we thought, yes, fantastic idea. And then we shifted. So here's just a couple. Low-fat everything. When I was growing up, Snackwells. If you are in my vintage, you will remember Snackwells. I can picture the packaging. It was fat-free everything, fat-free cookies, but loaded with sugar because fat was the enemy, not sugar. And then lead and gas paint in toys, which is insane. Let's put neurotoxins in kids' cribs and wall paint. What could go wrong? Spanking to teach respect. Now we know it increases aggression, anxiety, and reduces connection. So there's all of these things that used to be accepted that now have, because we have new information, new knowledge, are now not acceptable in the same way. And here's what's fascinating. I see the exact same thing happening with parenting approaches. When I was growing up, I remember watching my parents navigate the challenges of raising kids. And it makes sense because there was so many changes happening. So I'm going to take us back even further than when I was growing up, go back to the 1950s, early 1960s. And during this time, just maybe mostly the 50s, it was more of like an authoritative era. So parenting was heavily influenced by behaviorist ideas like B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson. There was a big emphasis on obedience and discipline and respect for authority. And parents were told to nip disobedience in the bud and not to coddle children for fear of encouraging dependence. And then the 60s and 70s roll around, and there's a lot of pushback. They're questioning rigid authority. We are focusing on child's rights and emotional expression. Those ideas began to emerge, and families began to prioritize democratic values, fairness, negotiation, and equality between parents and child. So that started happening, which was a shift. And then in the 80s to 2000s, you could call it the balance era. So parenting advice moved towards positive reinforcement, self-esteem boosting, open communication, but often at the expense of strong leadership. And this is when Dr. Neufeld started, or when I've heard him speak about this, he says this is when we began to lose our rightful place in the hierarchy. Actually, I would say all of these, if we go back to the 50s, 60s, authoritative era is on one side. Then you swing to the other extreme in the 60s, 70s, where we don't want any authority. We're pushing back on authority, which you could say started even before that. After World War II, there was a lot of pushback to too much authority and being, too aggressive. And then we have this time where we're trying to be happy and we're trying to be positive. And all of these are disrupting the natural hierarchy that needs to be in place for parenting to work at its best. So after generations of authoritative parenting, where children were expected to obey without question, there was a cultural backlash. And in an effort to correct this, we swung the pendulum again to the other side towards egalitarianism. We wanted to democratize the family, wanted to create fairness, give kids a voice, let them feel empowered, which are all great. But in doing so, we accidentally abandoned something essential, the natural hierarchy that allows adults to lead and children to lean on that leadership, simply because we didn't realize what we were doing. We forgot that we need to have this hierarchy, that parenting is about, yes, it's about attachment, it's about closeness, but in order for that attachment and that closeness to work, we have to have this structure of a parent who leads so that a child can follow, can depend on us. Kids don't just need to be near us, they need us to be in the lead so they can depend on us. Add to that the influence of behaviorist psychology, a la Skinner and Watson, who told us that we could train our children like lab rats, rewarding good behavior and punishing bad behavior. And so we started thinking we needed to parent for performance instead of connection. And parenting by correction became good parenting, no questions asked. But it came at a cost: fractured relationships, reduced trust, and children who learn to comply but not decide to want to listen to us. They didn't connect. They didn't have an open, soft heart towards us to let us influence them. They would comply to not get the consequence or to get the reward. And to make matters worse, we inherited cultural discomfort with emotions. So emotions for a while have been treated like a problem to be solved or a sign of weakness, not the fuel for connection and growth. So many children and many of us adults are in a flight from vulnerability, meaning we have shut our feelings down. We don't want to feel our emotions. So we might say, I don't care or whatever, not because of defiance, but because of defendedness, because it's too much for us to feel. It makes us too vulnerable. And so we start to turn those off. So with parenting, we've been through an evolution from spare the rod, spoil the child, because I said so. We've had spanking become widely accepted as a way to discipline children, timeouts as a standard practice, and still a standard practice. Think about it. With timeouts, we're literally putting kids in isolation when they're struggling emotionally. We're telling them, hey, go calm yourself down. And when you can fix your behavior and you're ready to behave, then you can rejoin us. So we separate them from connection at the exact moment they need it the most. So this brings me all back to this idea that we used to think it was a good idea to smoke on a metal tube filled with recirculated air, 30,000 feet in the sky, with people lighting up. And when you look back with the clarity of 2020 hindsight, you have to wonder, how did we ever think that made sense? But we did. Just like we thought going, to the backyard with a belt to whip your child made sense. But no matter which way you lean, what kind of parenting you've done in the past, I do want to just say, don't beat yourself up and don't be too hard on society. We go through evolutions based on what we know. And it makes sense that we have thought certain things because that's what other people have said makes sense. It's because back then we didn't know about a lot of things that we know now, but now we know so much more about the brain and about the emotional system. We know more about the nervous system. And I'm going to go through a few of the things that have come to our awareness in the last few decades. So one is the polyvagal theory. It's Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, and it shows that humans are biologically wired to detect safety and connection through co-regulation. So the tone of the voice, the eye contact, facial expressions, body language. When children feel connected, their ventral vagal system is activated, leading to calm, engagement, and growth. And when they feel disconnected or threatened, their sympathetic nervous system, that fight or flight part of their nervous system, is activated instead of the parasympathetic nervous system. So connection regulates the nervous system, making attachment essential for emotional and cognitive development. And we didn't know that a few decades ago. So new information gives us new awarenesses and moves us further along, I think, the evolutionary path. The other thing that has been discovered was the prefrontal cortex needs relationships to develop. So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision-making, impulse control, empathy, emotional regulation. It's still under construction, you could say, until the mid-20s. 25 is what I've seen in the papers for women, 30 for men. And Dr. Dan Siegel, in his brain, The Whole Brain Child, shows that attuned, safe caregiving supports the integration of the brain's upstairs, which is that rational part of our brain, and the downstairs, or the emotional part of the brain. So connection literally shapes the architecture of our child's brain. So the more a child feels safely attached, the more their brain can mature and regulate. Another thing that we now know is that proximity seeking is hardwired into our survival strategy. So John Bowlby, who has been deemed the father of attachment theory, showed that attachment behaviors are not manipulative. They're instinctual survival responses. So that might look like clinging, following, crying, even if it doesn't feel like we're attached, we're nervous. In mammals, especially humans who are born so helpless, we need to stay really close to our caregiver. We need to be attached to them. They are the person that ensures our safety and our nourishment and our protection. And so the child's system is always asking, am I safe? Am I seen? Am I soothed? Does someone care about me? Is someone looking out for me? Connection isn't a preference. It's the biological imperative in early life. They've also done cortisol studies to confirm the damage of disconnection. So when children experience chronic disconnection through harsh discipline, neglect, a lot of fear, their bodies release excess cortisol. And high cortisol levels in children have been linked to poor memory, weakened immune function, difficulty learning, anxiety, and depression. So children in environments where connection is consistent show healthier brain development and lower cortisol levels. So connection acts as this buffer, you could say, against toxic stress. And there was this fascinating study. It's by Dr. Edward Tronick. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. It's called the still face experiment. If you go on YouTube, you can Google this and see it. But what he did was he showed how babies become distressed, they become disoriented, and they eventually shut down when a caregiver becomes emotionally unavailable, even for 2 minutes. The infant first protests, then shows signs of stress, panic, and despair. It's fascinating. Go Google it. This is showing us that a child's emotional survival depends on connection, and disconnection, even subtle disconnection, is registered by the nervous system as danger. And then we have the discovery of mirror neurons and attunement. So neuroscientists have discovered mirror neurons, and these are brain cells that reflect the emotional state of others. So when a caregiver is attuned to their child, meaning they're mirroring their facial expressions and their tone and their emotion, the child feels seen and they feel understood, building secure attachment. So the lack of attunement leads to insecure or disorganized attachment patterns. Really just, they don't feel safe. They don't feel connected if they can tell that they don't have a caregiver that's picking up on what they're putting down, so to speak. So our kids literally borrow our nervous systems to regulate their own until theirs is ready. So bottom line, why attachment is the number one survival need is because, one, it's biologically hardwired. It regulates the nervous system. It builds the brain structure. It protects against toxic stress, and it lays the foundation for every form of learning and resilience and well-being. For decades after World War II, a lot of our parenting paradigm was based on experiments done with rats and pigeons by scientists like B.F. Skinner and John B. Watson. We now call them behavioralists, and they showed that you can train pigeons and rats with rewards and punishments, which makes sense. And that data, what they discovered, was eventually applied to parenting, to raising kids. But over the last few decades, there has been so much evidence, so much discovery proving that there's a lot more to parenting and to raising kids than offering them and training them with rewards and punishments. One of the many fascinating studies was published in 2015 in Current Biology, and scientists discovered something that really changes how we think about motivation and drives. So they put pairs of rats who knew each other in a 2-chamber setup. I believe the rats had been in the same cage for at least 2 weeks before they separated them like this. And one rat was trapped in a restrainer. They weren't hurt. It was just in a different area. They were separated, while the other rat could move around really freely. So one was in a small area, one was in a bigger area. The free rat had a choice. It could either open the container to let the cage mate out to free its trapped rat friend, or it could open a container with chocolate chips, which was their favorite food, or one of their favorite foods, I guess. And what happened is the free rats consistently chose to help their trapped friend over the food. And even if they did go for the chocolate first before freeing their rat friend, they would typically save some of the chocolate to share with their friend afterwards. And this is mind-blowing. It really reinforces what Dr. Neufeld has found in his attachment theory, what I believe, what I have found, and what to be working as a parent myself and working with so many clients is that attachment is not a luxury. It's a survival drive. So even rats, creatures that we rarely think as emotional, we don't think they have empathy. We wouldn't think they would choose to free their friend over food, will sacrifice food to preserve togetherness. And we were taught for generations that survival instincts were like, I'm going to take care of my own self, even though it goes against mothers running into burning buildings, or if we're in a dangerous situation, looking for our children, not just running for ourselves. So we've been taught for generations that food and shelter were the primary motivators, but science is proving otherwise. And more remarkably, in variations of this study where researchers threatened or stressed the rats, they would choose to protect their cage mates over seeking pleasure or food about 50% of the time. So the rats would choose connection over food. One of the most fundamental survival needs is connection. We thought it was food, it's connection. Connection wasn't just a nice to have, it was their primary driving instinct. And this is just one study that is completely transforming how we understand attachment and connection. There's other studies that you can go find as well that show the same thing, that it's togetherness, it's attachment, it's connection that serves the survival needs, meaning we are much more likely to survive when we have other people. So if we can get that portion taken care of first, then the other things fall into place. The studies show that connection isn't just a nice bonus in life. It's literally the foundation of healthy development and behavior. The human brain is operating like this. It's operating on the same principle that they're finding in the rats. What kids need most isn't correction or discipline. It's connection. And taking that even a step further, it's a connective, compassionate alpha. Showing up strong, taking the lead so our kids can depend, they can rest and stay safe and feel safe. So thinking our kids are going to behave better long-term and fulfill their potential as a result of punishment is about as irrational as lighting a cigarette in a confined tube where the windows don't go down and everyone is sharing the same air. What was once normal, a timeout chair, taking away toys, using threats and punishments to control behavior, no fat, high sugar diets, asbestos in insulation and hair dryers, lead in gas and paint and toys have all become things that science is showing us is actually harmful. What was perfectly acceptable in parenting and in our health just a generation ago is increasingly hitting the like smoking on an airplane vibe. I wish I could say that we were all getting it, but it's coming. It's phasing in. And even though it's not the mainstream yet per se, we're getting there. We're getting there. And I know that it's only a matter of time before this is the new understanding and acceptable belief about parenting, that we get that it's attachment and it's about helping their emotions come out and feeling safe. That is what we're after. And that's what's going to impact and influence their behavior more than anything else. Human beings are fascinating because there can be something that is 100% normal, acceptable, conventional, and then very quickly it can become like smoking on an airplane. This, of course, raises all sorts of questions. What are the things that right now are just normal? They're just how it is. They're just, yeah, it's Tuesday. That's what we do. And someday we're going to look back and we're going to remember what was normal and think, wow, that was insane. I can't believe we thought that. Here's a list of a few more things that hit this mark. Seatbelts. Seatbelts were optional. Kids were riding in the front seat, on laps, in the back of pickup beds. I remember going on a trip and we had a truck and there was a camper, what do you call it? It wasn't a trailer. It was on the back of the bed of the truck. And I was just hanging out back there with all my siblings going up 4 hours up to the mountains. It was just fine. Seatbelts were overprotected. Some people even fought the laws against, making seatbelts mandatory. And now if you don't buckle up, it feels like you're going skydiving without a parachute. Pregnant women smoking and drinking. In the 50s and 60s, it was common for doctors to tell pregnant women that a glass of wine or a cigarette was totally fine. It was just a little bit relaxing. Maybe they needed it. So what was considered harmless is now seen as dangerous. And did you know that in the mid-century, baby food formula was loaded with sugar? Because sugar gives you energy. That was the pitch. And now we know it spikes inflammation and messes with mood and metabolism. It's so interesting when you take a trip down memory lane, just because something is common, socially acceptable, or what your grandparents did doesn't mean it's healthy or helpful or worth repeating. I believe for the most part, humans are trying their very best. So yeah, we've decided the no-fat, high-sugar diet was good. We thought that, taking a few drinks during pregnancy was no big deal until we knew better, until we didn't think that anymore. Because we can only make our decisions based on what we know and believe and are aware of. So what if parenting through punitive consequences and control is the no-fat diet of emotional development? What if timeouts are our generation's airplane ashtrays? We have a very, very long history of something being completely normal and acceptable until it's not, until you have a realization, a wake up. Somebody recently told me with a straight face that children need to be trained with harsh consequences and rewards to learn proper behavior. And I was like, wow, okay. And they were just laying it out. They were so certain that they needed to enforce the rules through punishments and rewards. And that was the only way their child was going to learn right from wrong. And for me, I've been there. I've done that. I've tried that. And for me, that's like smoking on an airplane. Nope, it's insane. It doesn't work. Do we need to have limits? Absolutely. Do they need to be punitive? No. Now, there's something I've noticed, and this gets us into essentially how we are viewing the world, how we have our mental furniture arranged. And what I want to say is that the more awareness you have around what you're thinking and what you're feeling, and you're getting curious without getting mad, without giving your power away, the more impactful you're going to be as a parent, the more productive you're going to be as a parent. There are a lot of people right now saying all sorts of things about all kinds of things, from politics to economics to parenting. And to be able to hear other people's opinions without giving it power, getting curious without getting mad, is going to allow you to show up as the best version of yourself. Everyone is doing the best they can. So I love the gift of honoring everyone where they're at. One of my favorite few sentences that crossed my path years ago was, "No one is worthy of my judgment, and everyone is worthy of my love." It's one of my mantras. It's one of my statements that I try to live by. So as we are going through this evolution, wherever you are, whatever you're thinking about parenting right now, as we're in this episode, I'm reflecting back on beliefs that we've had as a society in the past. Know that none of this comes from judgment. It's fascinating to me. I truly believe that when someone created the no-fat, high-sugar diet, they thought that was a good idea. When they put sugar in baby food, they thought they were giving them energy. But the more aware we become of new discoveries, of new truths, things shift, and what used to make sense won't make sense anymore. So you can name it in its brokenness and in the things that you see are inefficient and ridiculous, but without giving it power or being a victim to it. So that's what we're doing. We're noticing it. You're backing up from your thoughts. You're observing your thoughts. You're looking at them. You're getting curious about them. There is this boundary that appears to exist between the interior and the exterior world. but it's more flimsy than you think. It's more like a porous membrane. And when we claim every thought that we can observe, when we look at our thoughts versus having them run the show, you're going to be able to make such a big difference in your own life and in your kids' life. So let me give you some examples of what this could look like as we transform our thinking. So we could go from children should never show big emotions, calm down, to emotions are the engine of maturation, all emotions are welcome. Or from my child is being ridiculous, getting upset over something so small, to developmentally, it makes perfect sense that what seems small to me is overwhelming to him. Or from when my child has a tantrum, I need to shut it down immediately, to when my child has a tantrum, they're communicating something important that they can't express with words. Or from behavior needs to be fixed and corrected, to behavior is communication and information. What's my child trying to tell me? Or from children need consequences to learn, to children need connection to develop. Or from my job is to control my child's behavior, to my job is to connect with my child and be their secure base. Or from timeouts teach children to regulate emotions, to time ins teach children that all emotions are acceptable and we can work through them together. Do you see how dramatically different those perspectives are? And yet each represents a complete paradigm shift in how we approach our children. So if lots and lots and lots of people begin to see something as different, they begin to have these shifts about emotions and about connection, you can see how what once was will change into something completely different. And something might end very quickly. In the course of 12 years, smoking went from normal on airplanes to completely banned. Things change quickly when we begin to change the way we think. So yes, inspect your thoughts, become aware of them, notice them. When you observe the way you hold the thought, you discover how malleable the thought is. You realize you can hold it differently. You can shape it differently. You can frame it differently. You can give it more power or less power, more weight, less weight. You can feed it your energy. You can keep your energy from it. You can treat it like something that makes sense on some level because it was created by someone who thought it was a good idea. But now you can see that it's completely misaligned to the new truths that science is showing us. These shifts in thinking aren't just philosophical. They change how we respond to ourselves and to our children in real time. And when you move from seeing a tantrum as manipulation to seeing it as communication, everything changes. Instead of thinking, how do I make this stop? You start thinking, what does my child need? Now, what I've noticed in regards to this, and I'm getting a little teachy here and going on a bit of a side tangent, but I keep noticing that we're trying to think positive about everything. So I'll tell people about how your child's tantrum, it makes perfect sense. And the teenage eye roll, is developmentally appropriate. And then they'll think, oh, I need to think positive thoughts about all of this. So if you found yourself doing this, know you're in good company. I've done this too. It's pretty common. So let's just completely toss out the idea for a minute that you need to feel happy and positive about your child's off-track behavior, because that's not the goal. The goal isn't to be positive Pollyanna about tantrums and defiance. The goal is to be willing to experience all of the emotions that come up, the frustration, the disappointment, the anger, the sadness, without letting those emotions control your response when your kids have tantrums and defiance and anger. I've never found that thinking positively for the sake of thinking positively or trying to be positive to be remotely helpful. It never seemed like something that worked for me. So if you want to just put that aside for a minute, if you have that tendency to think you want to feel good about all of the things that feel so bad, let's just put that aside for a moment, because I have a different idea that feels pretty darn amazing, but I'm not trying to feel happy about something I feel terrible about. I like to swap it out for this desire to be fierce with reality. And when I say fierce, the word has changed, but the definition a little bit over time. So here's what I mean. This is the modern definition of fierce: passionate, unapologetically committed, and bold. So fierce love, meaning unconditional, protective, no matter what kind of love. Fierce reality, not sugar-coated, not filtered, not flinching from the truth. Fierce parenting, connected, courageous, boundary-holding leadership rooted in love. Fierce does not mean harsh. It means clear, strong, and full of heart. So what does being fierce with reality look like? It's saying, yeah, I'm feeling frustrated right now, and I can still show up connected, with my child. It's saying this behavior is challenging and I don't need to fix it immediately. It's growing in your capacity to feel whatever comes up without being derailed by it. So I can feel sad and capable at the same time. I can feel angry and loving at the same time. I can feel overwhelmed and still show up. The emotions don't have to go away for you to parent effectively. They just need to be felt and acknowledged. And when somebody around you says something like, I'm just trying to think a positive thought about the tantrum or my kid's bad attitude, be like, no, 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 no. No, you don't want to do that. Let's be fierce with reality instead of try to sugarcoat reality or avoid reality. Let's grow in our capacity to see reality and feel our emotions so that nothing stops us. Not our children's challenging behavior, not our own big emotions about life or their behavior or the things we're going through. Because the truth is, we are not meant to feel good all the time. We're meant to feel all of it. The joy, the frustration, the love, the annoyance, and show up through it all, parent through it all. And the reality is that our kids are going to feel disappointed sometimes. They're going to melt down. They're going to overreact. And we're going to feel frustrated and annoyed and in love with our children and compassionate and in awe, all of the things. We're going to feel the highs and the lows. We're going to crash into the walls and then we're going to hit the precipices. The human experience is about experiencing all of it. The early 1900s to the late 1900s, in roughly a 100-year window of time, pretty much every civilized nation on the face of the earth outlawed physical punishments in school. So something that was just how it is, a fundamental arrangement of humanity in a blip. If you think about the larger arc of time, it was just a moment, suddenly went from something that was encouraged to something that was outlawed. Think, how does that happen? What is it about this experience that human beings, as astonishingly able as we are to make a giant mess of things, we can also come to these all at once advances and move forward and leave certain things behind? That's not positive thinking. That's not being disconnected from reality. That's being fierce with reality. So you can hear two parents debating whether timeouts actually work or debating about if consequences really teach lessons. And you have two choices. You can be filled with despair and say to yourself, oh my gosh, people aren't going to get this. I'm going to be an outlier. They don't get that connection is the key. Or you can say, this is not a problem. It's totally fine. They're exactly where they need to be, and I'm exactly where I need to be. And things can change quickly. Remember, in 100 years, it went from schools having physical punishments in school to them completely being off the table. So things can happen fast. When you find yourself getting overwhelmed by how hard parenting feels, or maybe you feel like you've tried your best, but it's not working, or you're frustrated about how your kids are or about how you are that day, notice the mental weight. Notice also your capacity to loosen it and lighten it and give yourself permission to just be exactly where you're at. And find a phrase like smoking on an airplane that allows you to laugh a little bit, allows you to see, oh, that's right. I used to think it was helpful to get frustrated with the kids or to think if I tried to take everything away, they would listen. But that's like smoking on an airplane. I used to believe that and now I don't. Now I see it's not working. Now I realize I don't need to fix their behavior. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to start noticing your thoughts about situations. Notice when you have a thought about a situation and your thought is, this isn't working. I'm so frustrated. I need to fix their behavior. How am I going to survive this? Versus, this is fine. I can figure this out. I'm fierce, passionate, and unapologetically committed and bold. And I can do this. I know what's best for my child. It's okay that this is hard. I can feel all these emotions. When you lean that way, you begin to move differently. Your actions begin to tilt in different directions and things begin to change. My assumption is that we're going to see in the coming years such a massive new expanded understanding of what parenting is, how to support our children through their life, how to support ourselves too. And it's going to be supported by these studies that are coming out, that have been coming out and that continue to come out, that are showing us how it's connection and attachment that is our preeminent need as humans, and how the exterior behavior that our children have is a reflection of the interior sense of safety and belonging, and that the real great giant catastrophes and cataclysms happening, air quotes there, out in our child's behavior start to shift when parents become more centered and in tune with who their child is, what their child needs, and shows up holding on to these basic beliefs about what it means to be a parent, and that it all begins with relationship. That was kind of a big word salad sentence. We're going to go with it. So I want you to start by looking at reality and being fierce with it, showing up unapologetically, bold, confident, trusting in the research from neuroscience and attachment theorists and developmental psychology, all pointing to the same conclusion. Children develop best in an environment of connection, in an environment of safety and understanding, not control, not punishment, not forced compliance. So yeah, that's what I have for you all, my friends. Hopefully we made it through, and the through line of like smoking on an airplane came through, because that's how this parenting evolution we're in is. It's like smoking on an airplane. What we thought was working, what we thought was a good idea yesterday, today is like smoking on an airplane. We realized that that was not the best idea, but we don't beat ourselves up for it because we were doing the very best we could with the information we had in that moment in time. So go connect your face off with your kids. Enjoy the time that you get to spend with them today and tomorrow and the rest of this week. It's such precious time. My kids are getting older, and I'm noticing just how fast it feels like it's gone. It's just in the blink of an eye, my baby is 16. So whatever age your kids are, enjoy those moments with them. They're precious. Go give them what they need, a big old dose of connection, strong leadership, and a belief that they are doing their best. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye, guys. Thanks so much for listening, you all. If you are ready to learn more about Connect Method Parenting, if you've been listening to the podcast and you think, ooh, I'd love to be able to implement this in my life and with my parenting more, then check out Pivot. It's my 8-week program where we deep dive into learning and implementing Connect Method Parenting so that you can take this information and transform your parenting journey. Head over to connectmethodparenting.com to find out when the next group starts.